I think the Hopi and the Maya exchanged information, but the cultures, of course, are different. There's archaeological evidence that the Maya came up into this area and exchanged information with the ancestors of the Hopi, because archaeologists have found buried in graves in northern Arizona and New Mexico parrots and macaws, whole bodies of macaw birds, which are a jungle bird that are found only in Mesoamerica. So they used to transport these brightly colored macaws and parrots up into this region, and their feathers were used for dancing. In fact, I saw a parrot dance on one of the mesas one time, which is just amazing to see this non-native bird being, represented at a sacred dance in Arizona. Kind of amazing. But I think there were definitely interaction between the Hopi and the Maya in very early times. The Hopi made migrations, and some of the theory is that they went down into southern Mexico, and part of the Hopi even stayed down there and kind of intermingled with the Maya. So there are definitely parallels between prophecies, but as I say, the Hopi are not that concerned with specific dates.
Right, they're the space. I like that. They're the sacred space people.
Yeah, they want to keep the earth, and space, the land functioning properly, and it's to their own benefit. To people living on the margin like that, agriculturally, it's to their benefit to keep the rain flowing and falling, and the springs flowing. So they are trying to keep the earth functioning in a way that will ultimately benefit them, and produce corn, the mainstay of their diet. And it still is to a certain extent, because there are a lot of people are engaged in agricultural pursuits from like March on into August, and there's not much else going on up there on the reservation, and people don't want to talk to you. They just are out farming.
I watched on your website, which is an awesome website, orionzone.com, and you had I think it's a 6 minute or so video on the chief and him out on his farm doing his beans. And
Oh, yeah.
I was at an elders conference either a year ago or two. I don't do well with time. It's either a year or two ago. And there is this elder there, and I'd gone with a few people, a group of us, and I was interviewing a lot of the people in our group, and a lot of them were, chiefs or ceremonialists or wampum belt carriers, storytellers, and he asked me, why am I here? I'm just a simple farmer. And I said to him, I said, out of all these other people, it's you I respect the most, because you are the one that's working with the land. You're the one that's the seed carrier of people, not just your people, but of all peoples. And what struck me was the old chief in your video doing everything by hand, and it was the same thing that old Norton, and he just passed away last year, did the same thing. He never used any kind of mechanized machinery or anything. It was everything done by hand, and he was doing all the corn and the beans and the squash, and it was just nice to see. And I guess I kind of correlated the two, and to me there's no greater thing than keeping those seeds of true plants that now everything is homogenized and built in a chemical lab somewhere, and it's so important. I just wanted to mention that, because to me it brought back my relationship with Norton, and that was very cool.
Well, I think that it's getting harder and harder to do that, but many of the elders are valiantly trying to keep up the old ways, the traditional ways of farming. And it's like I say, it's dry farming. It's not irrigated farming. There are some small irrigation techniques used, but it's not irrigated farming per se. There were certain groups in the Southwest that did use massive irrigations. There was a group around the current city of Phoenix called the Hohokam that built these massive canals, and some of the canals are still being used by the Phoenix water system today. These massive canals that hundreds of miles of canals that these ancient people uh, dug by hand. The people down south of the Hopi, did use these irrigation techniques, but the Hopi and like the people in southwestern Colorado and southeastern Utah, they pretty much did dry farming, and they are very resourceful in keeping the corn growing and the beans and the squash. And there are some people still doing it up there today. You can drive along and see the Hopi cornfield, and it's not the rows of corn that you see in our cornfields in the contemporary modern farming operations. You see these mounds scattered, in an irregular way. The corn's coming out of these mounds. It's nothing like the corn rows that you see other parts of the country. And these Hopi men, and it's primarily the men that do this. They use the old hose, and they plant using just a stick. I mean, it's very basic, but they're in tune with the spirit, with the Creator, with they're offering prayers all the time to help this agricultural grow in this is very harsh landscape. And of course, the Kachina dances are another way to help the process along. You've got to have a lot of respect for these. It's a really harsh life, up there. It's cold up there now. It's a little warmer where I am, but it's been a cold winter everywhere in Arizona. But it's very cold up there in the winter and very hot in the summer. The rains fall. Sometimes there's been a lot of snow recently, but they pray for winter snow to keep the land moist, and they pray for the summer thunderstorms that will help the corn grow.
I saw on, I think it was Facebook, that it was, what, minus 25?
Oh, yeah.
That's
It's
like,
been the
I mean,
coldest I've ever
holy.
seen it here. I've lived in this area for 15 years. It was, yeah, minus 25 around Flagstaff, which is the major town in northern Arizona. Grand Canyon was about the same. It was, I think, 1 degree on New Year's Eve here. But, it's pretty rare that it gets that cold.
I would like to now go into your books, I guess the trilogy, the Orion Zone, Eye of the Phoenix, and your newest one, the Kivas of Heaven. There's so many questions that these have brought up, but I'll get to some of the ones that, for me, I kind of think that people would be interested in. And so, and you kind of touched on this in the beginning, but maybe if there's any more that needs to be said on it, can you explain what the Orion correlation theory is?
Okay, yeah. I started going up to, like I said, the Hopi Reservation, driving up there to go to a Kachina dances. And I had just read a book by Robert Bouval called The Orion Mystery. And this theory, it deposits that the pyramids on the Giza Plateau are arranged in the form of Orion's belt. The Great Pyramid and the two other pyramids there exactly correspond to this pattern in the sky. And this was a very early, kind of form of star mythology or star knowledge that the ancient Egyptians were employing. And I was really fired up by this idea, and the idea that that I mentioned earlier, that the Lakota had this correspondence between sky and earth. And I was looking up towards the Hopi mesas where I was driving towards, and there, like I said, there were three primary mesas, and villages are built on top of the mesas, and in some cases at the base of the mesas. And I was wondering, well, maybe this is another Orion correlation similar to the one in ancient Egypt. Maybe the Hopi somehow built on these particular mesas for a reason, for a spiritual or celestial reason, that they settled there and not somewhere else. They could have settled other places they could have made the heart of their civilization, their life, other places that are better suited for agriculture, because there are no flowing rivers near these mesas. There are intermittent springs across the mesas, but there are no rivers. The nearest river is the Little Colorado River, about 50 miles away. I thought, well, maybe for some reason they built at this particular spot. And, I put that idea in the back of my mind and went up to the dances and watched the dances. And when I got back home, I took out a map of Arizona and I took out a star chart, and I realized that there was either an ancient village or an ancient ruin site corresponding to each major star in the constellation Orion. The belt stars are represented by first, second, and third mesas and the villages that are on those mesas. And there was an ancient ruin or village site corresponding to each one of these stars, and this really fired me up. And this is really an amazing coincidence. If it is a coincidence, it's just an amazing coincidence that so many of these stars would line up to spots on the Earth. I was just blown away by this whole correspondence, and it started me researching, going around to the various ruin sites and researching them specifically, seeing how they related to the specific stars. And this formed the basis of my first book called The Orion Zone. And I just kept going from there. I spent about 12 years researching this first book before it came out. The other two books are basically extensions of that initial research.
Wow, we're so dictated by our outer whims, but that to me sounds like a whole people that's dictated by their spiritual or inner connections to the earth. Maybe I should say the universe, not necessarily the earth, but the universe.
Oh yeah, yeah, and like you say, there are legends of star beings or star people coming down.
Oh, that was the other thing, yes. About the, there was something about the Greys. Was it in a name? I remember reading something about
Oh yeah,
the
yeah.
Greys.
The Greys. I started researching the gods, and you can find information, and it's kind of scattered across the internet and through different books. Um, there's a certain god that Hopi don't much like to talk about, because I tried to talk about this certain god to a number of Hopi, and they'll just kind of clam up and they won't say anything. It's a god called Mesau. It's one of the original gods that was there when the Hopi and the Hopi people, I should say, came out of the Grand Canyon and populated the Colorado Plateau, the area in northern Arizona. And when they first came out of the canyon at the beginning of the Fourth World, they met up with this god called Masao. And this god, he was basically a farmer. He carried a sack of seeds and a stick that he used to plant the corn with. But this god was very strange looking. He had these huge round eyes and kind of a round mouth, and his head was huge. It was bald and it was huge, and it was sort of the texture of a summer squash, kind of bumpy, and his feet were very long. In fact, his feet were as long as a human forearm, and his arms were kind of spindly, and his body was gray. In fact, the word Masau, the Hopi word Mas, M-A-S, literally means gray.
That's
So, and if you look at some artists have done renditions of what Masau has been described as, because the Hopi, like I say, don't like to talk about him, but some have come forth and talked about what this god looked like, and then artists have made representations of what this god looked. And you can see that the god, it looks very much like what we consider an alien gray. This god Masau, who still functions on the Hopi reservation and still is seen. Masau is the god of the underworld, the god of death and the god of this earth plane that we're living on now.